So we are just going to be starting with the concepts, a set of concepts. So again, policy study is all about ways of looking at decisions, ways of looking at what actually happens. So let's just walk through some of the fundamental concepts involved in this, while recognizing that there may be many more, but I'm just going to talk about some broad, which sort of frameworks which are fairly accepted in the field. Easier to say what policy studies is not rather than what it is. So let's start with that. It's not for the large part a quantitative science. There can be elements of it which deal with numbers. You can have there's a field called policy metrics, or derived from sociometrics, which is primarily quantitative in nature. And I don't also want to re-emphasize a distinction between qualitative and quantitative. Sometimes I feel there's a false dichotomy. Numbers, facts, figures are very important in policy, there's no question about it. But the way we study policy does not tend to usually utilize advanced quantitative methods. It's not concerned with facts and with proving them. It's not a proof, it's not a deductive science, it's not a proof-orientated field. And this one is crucial. It does not provide ready blueprints and solutions for problems. I've taken policy analysis classes in the past where people were very disappointed that we didn't learn how to make policy. So I'm sorry, but I said it right in the beginning. I can't teach you how to make policy. Nobody can teach anybody how to make policy, except somebody who is working with them in that particular setting. Policy is very contingent on the setting that you're working in. There are no rules for what is a good policy or what is a bad policy, what is an appropriate policy. A policy can be one word, it can be an entire document, it can be a constitution. There's no normative framework for a policy, except that it should have some purpose in mind. Beyond that, I really can't say anything about what is a good policy. We can say a range of things about what are good policies or not. We'll come to that when we come to governance. But this field is not oriented towards this. So if it can't do all of this, then what can it do? Okay. So first of all, it's a subjective social science. What do we mean by subjective here? We're talking about actors, we're talking about different perspectives of different actors, so it is naturally subjective because it seeks to understand differences in perspective and differences in how people make decisions. It's a study of differences. So that subjectivity is very important. It is concerned with concepts and their application. It's not concerned with facts, but it's concerned with concepts and how you apply those concepts. And it can help you, even as a policymaker, it can help you not by providing blueprints and solutions, but it can help you to frame, to organize your thoughts, to synthesize, to simplify. All that messy complexity, it can help you to think about it in an organized way. It helps to frame and address questions about real life problems. So this is how it can help you. It's like, people say, how do I use Atlas TI? So Atlas TI is a software, qualitative analysis software. You can use any qualitative analysis software. The software is not important. You are important. The software is just is there to help you to organize your thoughts. Okay. So like HPSR, policy is also drawn from a wide range of different types of disciplinary orientations. Political science, public administration, sociology, economics, law, management science, organization studies, psychology. Okay, so I won't keep reciting the list, although this is actually quite interesting to see how policy studies draws from some of these other fields, but maybe that's for a different discussion. But also important to note that policy studies are developed independently in some of these fields. So education policy is an independent field, and it draws from theories of education as well as from core theories of policy. Similarly, health policy, because health is a qualitatively different field from others. So there are some elements of it which need to be addressed independently. So in that way, it also draws sustenance from the topic area that it is dealing with. Okay, so we talked about types of policy earlier: distributive, constituent, and regulatory. Now, this is another relevant concept, the scale of policy, and a fairly fundamental concept. The distinction between high politics and low politics policy. Yeah, these are synonyms for that. High politics, also called macro policy or systemic policy. Micro policy or low politics policy is called politics as usual. Sectoral policy or micro policy. I'll explain that. High politics policy is concerned with the maintenance of core values, including national self-preservation and the long-term objectives of the state. Low politics policy is concerned with issues not seen as involving fundamental or key question relating to a state's national interests or those of important or significant groups within the state. So again, I know I'm referring to state and terminologies like that here, but I'd still not suggest we don't get into state and non-state, because that's not the we are not really referring to state in the context of state versus non-state. We are referring to state in the context of a polity, of the existence of a particular geopolitical entity. Okay, so examples. Health. Let's just start with the most basic one. Is health a high politics issue? Is health policy a high politics policy in India? Now we see more about health policy in the newspapers, and it is becoming an electoral issue as well in places. What about? But let's cast our net wider. What about places like the UK and the US, where entire governments are seen to rise and fall on? Let's focus on, say, the US. Yeah. So clearly, it is a major election plank. It's a high politics issue. I'd make a small provocation. I know we are running out of time, but a small provocation that actually health is not a high politics issue in the United States. It's spending on health that is a high politics issue. Would anybody? Just it's a sort of a hypothesis, because I don't think people are talking about health. I think that it's an economic issue. It's economics, because health has become an economics issue, that it has become a high politics issue. Health is still not a high politics issue. Where is health a high politics issue? If we look at that kind of thinking, and we can take it even one step further. Most people still talk about health services. Is anybody really talking about health? And then I have questions like, okay, so maybe the Bhutanis are the ones who are really talking about well-being as a core goal for the state. So they are the ones really talking about health. But then there are places which do focus on health services. So there's Cuba. Okay, so I think now we are fairly clear. But I think this distinction is important for us as policy analysts, for health policy and systems researchers, because we are not just interested in this. We are also interested in this. Yeah, as a topic of research. We are not only interested in what goes on in the newspaper, we are also interested in all the stuff that happens in ministries, in local health authorities, in institutions. We want to understand that reality, try and make it better. Maybe even we are interested in trying to engineer a shift from low politics to high politics. Okay, so let's move on from that concept. I think that one's fairly clear to this one. So this is a fundamental binary, fundamental split that runs through the world of policy analysis. Ideas versus interests. So why do we talk about ideas versus interests? Ideas versus interests is invoked in the context of decision making. What is the main reason why decisions get made? Why do policies get formulated? Why do particular allocations get made? Why does the world go round? Is it on the basis of ideas, or is it on the basis of interests? Obviously both are important, but are we neglecting one to the are we sort of giving one more importance to the detriment of the other? How do they interact with each other when decisions get made? So ideas, what are ideas? These are examples of ideas. Norms, beliefs and values. So there are kind of goals overarching. So these are ones which are specific to health. The idea of the sort of core philosophical ethical principles, beneficence, equity, justice. We believe it's good. People need health care. People need to be helped. So those equity and justice, of course, they are core principles for us as well. Then there are particular norms and values which are also ideas. It's all part of the software, cultural, social, religious norms and values. And then there is the entire world of rationality, where we believe in science. We believe that it can bring about a better assessment of our priorities, a better understanding of what's happening, and we can allocate, we can plan our resources, and we can deliver our services according to that. And on the other hand, you have the interests. And interests, obviously, I'm sure that's been touched on yesterday as well as today in the economic analysis lens. So direct financial gain or maximization of self-interest, but not only economic interest. You can have a range of different types of interests and a way of different ways of understanding those interests. Obtaining political power or manipulating it for gain, social standing and prestige, social accomplishment. So which are more important, and when do they become more important? It's a bit of a rhetorical question, so I won't open it up right now. Let's think about ways in which ideas and interests become relevant, and keep that in mind as a theme moving forward. This is another common binary, another common classification in how we think about policy. So does policy change based on a sort of a rationality model, or does it change based on a incremental model? And how we understand this distinction is crucial to how we think about how we can transform, how we can change what actually happens. So the rational model suggests a linear sequence from problem identification to resolution. It tends to focus on solutions. There's an entire industry of research that suggests that a particular solution for health system problems can be generated through good research, social experimentation, using randomized methods. You can say that getting teachers to clock in schools is the solution for why schools don't work well. So that's an extreme example of a rational model. Obviously, most models aren't that extreme, but they focus on the solution. They don't focus on the process. They often recommend wholesale changes. A rational model suggests a wholesale change, driven by objectivity and scientific reasoning. So again, I'm just emphasizing here, we are talking about application of scientific method, which is traditionally used for the natural sciences, but in the context of social and organizational processes. Yeah, I'm not talking about the practice of natural science. I'm talking about the practice of policy. So the rational model is often applied to policy just in the way that it is applied to natural sciences. That we can think about a solution, we can work towards that solution through a wholesale change. The incremental model suggests that actually it's not so straightforward, and also that it can't be so straightforward. There is a non-linear model of processes. It's process and context focused. It emphasizes consensus and participation as as being more significant than solutions in the process of change. It suggests, as the name suggests, it suggests small changes to existing positions rather than wholesale changes. And it suggests that decisions are driven as much by pragmatics, interests, relationships as by scientific reasoning. There is no particular one which is better. Either one can be better given a particular context or a particular situation. If you're flying a plane, clearly you need to be rationalistic in your thinking. If you're organizing a complex social process, maybe the incremental model is more appropriate. Most actual action is somewhere in between. Okay, the big one, power. Another concept. There is an obvious form of power which is involved in making particular decisions. So decision making is a form of power which is the most obvious. So A makes a decision which impacts on B, that's decision making power. So A has some power over what will happen to B. There's also non-decision making power, and which is also related to the ability to resist power. So B finds a way to not comply or to not be affected by what A has done. That's also a form of power. Okay, so those are the more simple forms of power. Then there's thought control, which you already referred to when you spoke about the ideas-based approaches. Can you give me an example? There's a question I like to ask of an entire industry that is based on thought control. The fundamental premise of this enterprise area of work is thought control. Beyond health. The stock market, great. Wow, yeah, I didn't think of that actually. Yeah, it's a very perception based. But the fundamental premise, I mean, if you ask a stockbroker, okay, so they'll admit that that's the premise, but they won't market it as the premise. Advertising is fundamentally premised on thought control. You have to change people's minds. Okay, authority. Authority is a type of power which stems from the primary form of power, which is decision making, and within that also you can have different types of authority. There's a rational legal authority which emerges from within the democratic institution or within state institutions. There are particular authorities which are ascribed to particular individuals, organizations, and which are widely accepted by society, and those are forms of rational legal authority. They are underwritten by law in some way, and what the Prime Minister has the authority to do that, the various ministries, the bureaucrats, and even the principal of a school, all these people are people who have been given a sort of a legally underwritten authority, which is premised in an understanding of that the state will act rationally or institutions will act rationally to promote the wider good. And then there are other forms of authority, traditional authority and charismatic authority. I think this is self-explanatory, so we don't need to go into examples because we need to push on. But these are traditionally seen as the instruments of power. So you have the coercion, which is the threat of some negative influence or impact on you. There's inducement, which is the carrots, which are you exercise power through suggesting that people will get some benefit or actively offering them a benefit. And there is also power of co-optation, which is by saying that if you come along and you work with us, then there will be benefits involved in that. Okay, so that was the kind of power, is very loaded, charged kind of thing. But it's not the only type of relationship that is very important. There are also other types of relationships, many affinities, which are also very important in health systems and health policy. And there are a lot of examples of work coming out about how actually some of these are determining factors in how our health systems perform. So instruments of implementation can be legal in nature, financial in nature, organizational in nature, and personal in nature. This is a fairly prospective take on implementation. But I'll draw your attention more to the second one, theories of implementation, which can be top down or bottom up. And we already went through this on day one. So this is a reiteration of the same thing. Focus on execution of policymakers' intentions starts with a statement of intent, clear lines of authority and enforcement of norms. Bottom up, subordinate actors are also seen as decision makers, such as the theory of street level bureaucracy. Starts with a statement of behavior, and implementation is seen as relationships between actors, not as a unidirectional but as a bidirectional relationship. Okay, final one, context. So we always struggle with the idea of the context as being very fuzzy. We don't really know what context is, and I found this to be quite a nice way of understanding context, of breaking context up into its component parts. So when we're talking about a policy issue or something that we are studying as a policy analyst, then this is a useful way of organizing one's thoughts. Context can be either situational, transient, impermanent, or idiosyncratic conditions or events that has an impact. So some event, like you suddenly have a lot of deaths in Japanese encephalitis deaths in UP that happen every year. Suddenly everybody wakes up. Yeah, so that is your transient event, and that is an important context. Yeah, but it's a situational context. It's happening in a particular point in time and space. Structural context, the relatively unchanging elements of a system or policy, for example, its economic and administrative base. So that is a broader economic, political, administrative environment in which policies and systems are operating. Yeah, so those are the unchanging elements. So that's the structural elements. Cultural. So cultural and structural can actually be related very closely. The value commitments prevalent within the polity of system. Structural maybe refers more to the kind of hardware aspects, and cultural more to the software aspect. So how does the system, what are the underlying presumptions, the norms, the values that drive the people who are working in that particular structure? That is also a context. And then external, or you can call it exogenous, or something that occurs outside the boundaries of that particular system or of that particular country, but it is still important and relevant for what is happening, and it influences decisions that happen within it. So very simple, it's not a complicated thing, just a way of organizing your thoughts about contextual influences. So if you're thinking about any particular policy issue, just think about, okay, has any particular events influenced this? Particular striking events? Okay, you can think about, okay, if there are none, then just set that aside. If there are some, you can put those down. What are the kind of structural, and cultural elements that are conditioning these decisions? And then finally, is there something that we are missing that is not directly applicable in the system, but something that reflects to the wider environment? And those are the exogenous or the external factors, contexts. Okay, there are more sophisticated ways of interpreting context, but this is a useful one for basic policy analysis. So these are the kinds of questions then now. This is a summary slide of all that we've discussed so far. Not all of it, but most of it. So content, when you are investigating a particular policy issue or a health systems issue, think about the content of the policy, what ideas have helped to shape that policy, what ideas are contained in the actual content of the policy, what type of policy is it predominantly, is it regulatory, distributory, what type of policy is warranted, what is the scale of the policy, is it high or low politics, who makes and influences decisions, so who has the power, and how is that power exerted, whose interests are at stake, and whose ideas are involved. So this interplay, if you can bring some insight into this interplay between the interests at stake here and the ideas being promoted here, that will really add depth to our understanding.